Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 102 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels here from Sandusky, Ohio, and I am thrilled that you're listening. In this episode, an interview that I conducted late in July, I had the great pleasure to sit down with Carolyn Cummins of the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, before we dive into the episode, I wanted to remind you that you can find everything related to the podcast at yankonthefooty.com. And don't forget that if you want to help out the show, you can do that by visiting my Buy Me a Coffee page or checking out the Redbubble store page, also on my website. One last other little piece of business that I want to get to. In the top toolbar on my website, I've added a new tab up there that says Register as a Guest. And if you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, or if you know somebody that you think would be a great guest, you want to send the link to the website to them or fill it out yourself, that'd be absolutely fantastic. I'd love to get you on the show and talk some footy with you here in the very near future. I did have one gentleman reach out to me last week. It's only been up for about a week. Like I said, I'm always looking for interesting people to come onto the show and talk about the game that we love. Now, today's club of the episode is the Maroubra Saints from the Sydney area, and they are a club that's been around since the year 2000, so they're a relatively young club. And it's kind of interesting because they are a parent-run community club, and they have the goal, as it states on their website, they have the goal that every player gets an equal opportunity to play and to have fun, regardless of their ability. So it's about developing the game. And the Saints play their games at either Heffron Park in Maroubra or at Pioneers Oval in Malabar. And they've got several clubs from ages 5 up through 18. And their alumni include Swans player Errol Golden. And what was really neat is I was doing a little bit of research on the club. I did find that he had posted a video just last week on their Instagram page wishing the kids best wishes because their season had been shut down while the Swans are off still playing finals up through last week. And I came across this club by chance, and I'd been beginning to follow clubs on Instagram and that sort of thing. And I actually ran across this one, like I said, by chance last evening as I was going through my Twitter thread. And I saw a post last evening from economist and author Tim Harcourt. And he put out a post that was in support of Anthony McDonald, Tip, and Woody in light of some of the things that have happened to him recently in social media. And he was talking about how his club, the club that his son plays for, is very accepting, and that his club loves wearing, the black, red, and white of their uniforms. And it really resonated with me. So, Mr. Harcourt, thanks a bunch for putting that post out there, and it's an absolute pleasure to give your favorite club a shout-out. Again, you can go ahead and find all the information about that club on the show notes of this episode. They'll be right up at the top of the show notes there. And I hope they're able to get their season back up and running. Probably not this year, but next year I hope it goes like gangbusters for them. So, enough talk. Let's jump into my discussion with the passionate Swan supporters, Carolyn Cummins. A lot of fun. If you're somebody who's into journalism as well, we got into that a little bit. Some absolutely fascinating insight from her, and I think you're going to like it. So let's go ahead and dive right in, ladies and gents.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by my guest this evening. We've talked Swans footy on and off on Twitter for the last year or so. And well, in the present climate, she's able to sit down for a chat because she doesn't have anywhere else to go right now. Carolyn Cummins is the commercial property editor at the Sydney Morning Herald. She's also a Swans club ambassador and the 9th female full member of the Melbourne Cricket Ground, which I want to learn about because I'm not sure what that means. I'd like to welcome Carolyn Cummins to the podcast. Carolyn, thanks for coming on this evening. It's so glad to have you on here.
It's a pleasure, Craig. Thanks for reaching out. I'm very excited to have a chat.
This is going to be fun. It's it's at a point in time of the year. This is going to be a much better conversation than when we kind of initially started talking about this last year when the Swans were struggling, last year with some injuries. And, if it was like a ride in an amusement park that if you were over this height, you weren't allowed to play with the Swans last year because it seemed like all of their talls were hurt last year. But this year they're having a remarkable turnaround, a great season. And, it's great to have you here.
Thank
I
you.
mentioned you're a club ambassador for the Swans. For those of us who were here in the States and those of you that may not know, what is it that a club ambassador does to help out the club?
Oh, thanks. It's a very honoured role. I was very honoured. I was about 5 years ago. I was asked by the chairman of the Sydney Swans, Andrew Pridham, if I'd like to be an ambassador, and I jumped at the chance. And it really is. I do have a very fancy scarf that says Swans Ambassador on it. But I also it's to promote the club. There's 150 of us, all walks of life, all different. Some are actors and actresses, some are singers, other people like myself in the business world, and I'm a journalist. It's to use our so-called standing in society in a way is to promote the game, to promote the club. One of the biggest things and the proudest things I did, but a very sad moment, was when Adam Goodes was, the terrible booing of poor old Goodsy. And at the Herald, we got together and we did a big wraparound with getting to all ambassadors and to all our fans out there and people we knew to say we stand with Adam. And I initiated that at the Herald, and that was the day actually came out when he didn't play, and when we all stood up at the 7th minute of the third quarter and cheered and clapped him, but he wasn't there, sadly.
Right.
So it's that sort of thing, is to promote the club. It's to it's not an official. We don't have a job description per se that say we have to do it, but when I started seeing a lot more tweets popping up last year talking about AFL, and somebody I think tweeted it's like rugby and soccer. So I felt it was my obligation to come out and say, no, it isn't anything like those two games, and to help promote the game and also to help promote the club at any opportunity we can. And my grandfather did play for South Melbourne, so there's a bit of family history there as well. And I have been a very dedicated fan for, many, many years.
So you said your grandfather played with them, and I pulled up, and I've got up on the screen here an article from back in 2016 where remembering how the legend of the Bloods was born. Can you take us through that? Because I was reading through that again last night, and the whole story about the socks and everything there, and
yes, yes, it was great, wasn't it? It was funny actually, because working at the Sydney Morning Herald, of course, is in Sydney, and AFL is very much a Melbourne game. And when the Swans got into the final, certainly in 2005, when I went down to Melbourne, if the Melbourne public doesn't have a Melbourne team in it, they convert one. So all of a sudden, Sydney Swans were back to being South Melbourne against West Coast. And we're saying, no, but we're Sydney. They go, oh, no, you're South Melbourne. So in 2016, after we won the 2012, etc., I was walking around the office in red and white, and one of the sports editor at the time, who's a Collingwood supporter, said, and my colleagues call me CC, and she came up, she said, now, CC, I defy you to be able to wear red and white for 5 days. I said, really? Is this a problem? And so on the 4th day, and there's a tradition in the grand final week that one gets one's scarf and festoons one's desk at work, and that means putting the scarf over the laptop and the screen and the monitor and everything. So I had much red and white. And in Sydney, everyone's just walking around like I was an idiot, thinking that I was just going for the St George Dragons in Sydney or something. In Melbourne, I would be one of a million, but in Sydney, I stood out.
Right.
Anyway, the editor came up and he said, what's with the red and the white? What are you carrying on about? So I said, well, my grandpa played. So he said, write a story about it. So I did.
Good deal. So where do the Bloods come? Where does that name come from?
Well, my grandma told me, and my grandpop years ago told me, but I was very young. He said to me one day, when they went to the 1918 grand final, back in the day, South Melbourne was a very working class. It was almost like, it was around the ports, around the South Melbourne was sort of a very sort of waterfront kind of area, and so to play football was a big deal because it sort of the whole suburb went out. But it was also very Anglo-Saxon and very Catholic, pretty much. So they all would go to church on Sunday morning, and the priest, Paddy, said, to be sure, and back in the day when they played, they had jumpers with the red sash, like Richmond and Essendon. And he said to the congregation, and next Saturday, I bless you, you blood-stained angels, to come home with the flag. So
there's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
Okay.
That's what Grandpop told me. Oh. And then Grandma rolled her eyes and she said, oh, those days I sat there out in that windy, horrible lakeside oval knitting your damn socks, Frank. And I have 12 cousins, most of whom weren't that interested and don't really follow. My favourite cousin who passed away sadly this year, he was mad Richmond supporter, and one's Essendon and two are St Kilda, but I always loved Grandpop, so I went South Melbourne, even though my entire family are Collingwood supporters. And so when I moved to Sydney, it was a no-brainer to follow the Swans. But I sat down and Grandma told me, I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we got all the different wool. We were given red and white wool, and we had to go and sit there like dutiful girlfriends and fiancés and wives and knit their socks.
So, it's been interesting this year because, since the Swans have kind of been displaced with the lockdowns and such, I've seen a couple of the games where they've been playing in Victoria where some people have broken out the South Melbourne signs in the stands. Yes. I've seen the cheer squad with this, and I didn't, I had to go back and kind of look at that article that I'd linked to a while back and realize that that's where that was coming from, because it hadn't really registered with me that foundation was there before they had gone to Sydney. I had to go back and dig that up again and read into that a little bit more. So it's great to see that people are still, kind of working. Of course, they're not going to the games in Melbourne right now either, but it was great for a couple of weeks to see the Swan supporters, coming back out to support their club, where they were originally from.
It was founded in 1874, so it's one of the oldest clubs to form in Melbourne, or one of the first. But again, being in that sort of demographic area, bear in mind there wasn't much else to do back in 1896 or so.
Right.
1909 or 1918, there was a lot of wars and things. So to go out and watch a football game was, as I say, the whole town's a bit like those sort of, the American movies where the steel town boy makes good and he escapes the steel town, and wasn't Tom Cruise in one of those movies?
All the right moves, yes.
All the right moves, and it's the same thing. If your son played for the team, that's what the entire neighbourhood looked forward to for the whole week, because there wasn't much else really happening back then.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
It brought it just brought the whole community together. And with South Melbourne particularly being, it pretty much was disappearing until Jeffrey Edelston, who also passed away this year, the colourful Dr. Jeffrey Edelston. He saw that you could bring AFL to Sydney, which in itself was a big thing to do because Sydney didn't want to know anything about AFL, being a rugby town. But South Melbourne would have died. The Lakeside Oval, the club rooms are pretty much disappearing, or disappeared by then. They went to rack and ruin. South Melbourne probably won one game in 20 years or something. So, and there's no cash, and AFL didn't have cash. It was something you played on the weekend. You had to go work. It was a depression, all those sorts of things. They just didn't have the cash to keep the teams going. So it pretty much was a team like Footscray and Fitzroy, which became the Brisbane Lions, were going to disappear if they didn't get cash to help them. So it's also an emotional thing that the Swans they came the Sydney Swans, but South Melbourne is a club that is one of the eldest that got saved.
Right. And And it's interesting. And I actually forgot to ask this a couple of weeks ago when I talked to Frank Davis, who played for the Hawks and then was the recruiting coordinator for the played for the D's and was the recruiting coordinator for the Hawks. I was able to dig up that there was actually a time where they were talking about Hawthorn and Melbourne merging together as well.
Yeah.
And I saw a YouTube video where somebody had done a mock-up of what their Guernseys would have looked like, and they were actually pretty sharp because they kind of incorporated they looked a lot like Fremantle's Guernseys, but with Gold Coast colors.
Yes,
it was kind of an interesting combination that they, because they'd borrowed from both clubs there. So it's good that they were able to, that they're still able to be, independent clubs. But the Swans have certainly grabbed a foothold in Sydney. I mean, they seem to be rather well supported there now.
Yes. Well, again, it took many, many years. I mean, I moved up to Sydney in 1988 and used to go to a game, and I think it was me and the coach and 3 others were sitting there, and it was pretty grim. They'd be lucky to get, I don't know, 5,000 people actually that's a very good day. I worked at Channel 9 at the time, so I knew Mike Willisey, and he took me along to a game one day, and QBE was a very long-term sponsor, and they invited me to a game, and I told them about Grandpop, etc. And they just really, it was just desultory. We lost, Warwick Cat was all a bit rah-rah, and the pom-poms, and Jeffrey Edelson, if you have a look at him, we had pink helicopters and swanettes, and it was all too much for AFL aficionados who thought it typical Sydney was all a bit glam and glitzy, never going to work. And it was awful. And it really wasn't until the mid-90s, 1996, when we got into the grand final. Ironically, John Longmire couldn't play because he hurt his knee. That the Swans, all of a sudden, it became popular. And it also got a bit of a bit more corporate money into it, and it became a bit of a, they did the marketing very well and got sort of people in for drinks on a Friday night to watch it, and it sort of built a bit of momentum. And also they did it very well. They started hitting schools, and ex-Melbourne, a lot of Melburnians live in Sydney, and all of a sudden they realised that their kids could start playing AFL at school because it's a less contact sport than, say, rugby. So it just built slow momentum. But when Paul Roos said, we've been waiting for this cup since 1933, here it is. I mean, Sydney's we've been waiting for it since we got here. And to win in 2005 was just, we hit the top of the mountain.
So we
arrived.
Is the 2005 grand final, is that your greatest memory as a...
Oh, most definitely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, I definitely. I've been to a lot in Melbourne. I was very lucky to go with my dad.
Yeah.
He lived there. But that was just so good. It was just so emotional because it really was one of those against the odds thing. It was a bit rocky. It hit the top of the steps. and it was la da 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 da.
Yes.
and it was also to the naysayers, like, don't write us off as aerial ping pong, and all the people in Melbourne still hate Sydney football, really, to a certain extent. There are some people in Melbourne that think AFL should stop at, say, the Albury-Wodonga border, and not go any further. So it was just all those things mounting up. But it took a long, long time for Sydney to really gain any recognition and any fan base. But finally, again, winners are grinners, you see. You start winning, people turn up. You start losing, they won't turn up.
I'm guessing that some of those people that think the game should stop at that border, and I'm not going to repeat that term because I don't think I actually caught it. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it again. Do you think some of those people who think the game should stop there are also the same ones that are kind of dug in against the AFLW?
Yes, yeah, to a certain extent, I think, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'd say yes in that they don't like change.
Okay.
And also there's again a lot of rivalry. The Sydney Melbourne rivalry. I think I've lived in London and I've sort of followed world events. I don't really know if there's anything quite like it in any other country in the world where it's just so fit. Maybe Scotland, England, perhaps. But Sydney and Melbourne, it's only an hour's flight. It's one of the busiest flight routes in the world. But there is just so much rivalry.
Yeah.
And they're sort of such different towns. Melbourne's a very night city, more English influences. You know, you meet somebody in Melbourne, they say, where did you go to school?
Mm-hmm.
You meet somebody in Sydney, they say, what's your house price worth? You know, so
Okay.
So it's there's a great play called Emerald City, which shows up Sydney's very glitz and glamour, and it's the harbour, and it's Sydney's more LA, Melbourne's a bit more New York, if I could put it that way. Sydney's got the weather, Melbourne's just got the culture, in a way.
That's a really good way of putting it, because I was going to suggest the kind of the rivalry between New York and Boston, but since you described the school and the house price, and that the LA New York analogy, I think might work better. Actually, that's not a bad one.
Yes, and I think Sydney, we are a bit more north, a bit more subtropical. We're warmer, and there's also so much. There's more to do in Sydney on a winter's day. In Sydney, it can still be, pardon me, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite pleasant in the sun.
You mean 20 Celsius?
20 Celsius, sorry.
Okay.
20 Celsius, sorry, yes.
It's okay, because
maybe in Alaska, 20 Fahrenheit's quite warm.
now the scarf is making more sense.
Exactly. It's chilly here tonight. But you can edit a bit out. But
that's great, I think.
So it to get people to go to a football game in Sydney, where you can either go walking around the harbour, you can do 10 other 10 things. Whereas Melbourne, where it's wet and cold, and I grew up in Melbourne, wet and cold, you just go to the footy. So you're competing against the attitude that AFL is not a Sydney game. And also from Melbourne point of view, it's all glitz and glamour and it's silly. And what would you all know about AFL anyway? Whereas this is our town, this is our sport, and you people interstate don't know what you're talking about. And it's the same for Brisbane, Fitzroy, Brisbane.
And certainly Gold Coast, if anybody went to the games.
Gold Coast, yeah.
Yeah.
And West Coast. See, West Coast, Gold Coast, Adelaide Crows, and Sydney, well, little less Sydney, are what they sort of manufactured games. They're players on their last couple of seasons. They've sort of created a game, plonked them somewhere else and created a new club. And the old state establishment don't like it. Yeah.
Well, that's as you said, it's all about the change.
It's about the change. And all of a sudden an upstart like West Coast or an upstart like the Adelaide Crows or an upstart like the Swannies win the hallowed grand final. I mean, it's like, what? It's outrageous. Well,
and didn't Brisbane do it 3 years in a row, if I'm not mistaken?
Did it 3 years in a row, which drove people in Melbourne insane.
I bet it had to. It had to. But it's I'm a Cleveland sports fan, and the Cleveland Browns won a championship when I was a year old, and the Cavaliers won, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and that's been it. And
you're sort of, you're like the D's. It could be the D's this year. I think the D's are looking very good.
They are. So I was actually, I was going to ask you a little bit later on, but I'll go ahead and ask you this now then. So who were the Swans playing in the grand final this year?
Oh, well, it could be Melbourne, Sydney.
There you go.
Fingers crossed. That would be good, actually. A Melbourne-Sydney game would be really good because, again, the 2016, the Western Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs are Footscray, formerly Footscray. And if any of your listeners, there's a fantastic documentary called The Year of the Dogs, and it's a documentary about how Footscray almost went under and how the whole sort of suburb of Footscray rallied around and they interviewed the ladies that washed all the team's jumpers in the sort of 80s and 90s when, again, that club was on its last legs, and cut up the oranges and made the sandwiches and did all these sorts of things to keep the club going, knitted their socks, all these things. And finally they got a bit of corporate support and they became the Western Bulldogs, but they had to merge with a couple of VFL teams to get the cash in. So yes, I think it's great that we've all survived and we're now thriving.
Yes, and they are, and it's great to see the game, growing as it is, and there's talk now about the possibility of a club in Tasmania, and but that would be 19 teams, and how do you figure out the schedule, and do you figure out a 20th team somewhere, or do you move an existing team to Tasmania and keep it at 18? It's all about whose ox is going to get gored here.
I think so, and I think nowadays, the Swans did it in 1985. It was a lot easier back then. It was a lot cheaper. You didn't have physios and marketing people, and the entourage was just you and the trainer and a tube of deep heat, pretty much, in an ice bucket or an ice pack.
Yes.
And that was pretty much the whole team. But now you've got so much, it's a business, and it's very hard to create a business from scratch to make it viable and invest a return in 2 years, which is what an investor would want.
Right,
You're going to back a new team as a sponsor. It's almost like creating a super league, a team of sort of super players, and that's not good. That's what Rupert Murdoch tried to do back here many years ago in rugby league, and that got squashed pretty quickly.
Okay.
Because you can't just create a team that's going to win the grand final for the next 20 years, because that's just not a competition.
Yeah.
And because there's such history steeped into AFL, it's very hard to move those pillars. There's still people behind the scenes that will just block it and will stop it instantly. So I think to create a new team, you need a big, deep pocket, and you need to have that support to start with.
Okay.
You've got to get a fan base
to
know that if you go to Tassie, you've got to know that people will turn up, because the sponsor wants to put money in. They don't want to go to an empty ground. And you've got to have a fixture that will rotate good teams around to come down there. And Tassie's it's a long way.
Right.
It might look small on the map, but it's not.
Yeah,
it's not that easy to fly to and for a lunchtime gig.
That's a good point. Yeah, and it's and you can almost look at that at the crosstown rivals with the Giants, who have had they've had some success playing, but they do not. From what I have gathered, they do not have a significantly large fan base.
No, because rugby league is very strong in the West. It's a lot stronger than Sydney. Also went to the East, where it's not as strong. There's the Sydney Roosters, but it's not a heartland. The West is very much more of a heartland of rugby league. It's entrenched in there, in those suburbs more. So to infiltrate a new code, and it's still seen as a Melbourne code, into something that's foreign territory, it takes a long time. I mean, as I say, it took the Swans 20 years. So
right.
And we encourage the Giants, and we encourage crosstown rivalry because it's great to get players there. And the thing that frustrates a lot of the AFL too is that Sydney has the academy, which a lot of other teams can do, but we've done it. And we're creating the players like Heenies and Rampies and even Kieran Jack to a certain extent. They played, and another guy, Robert Lewis Thompson, back in the day, LRT. And that irritates some people that they think we're getting an edge. But so the Giants have got a big of a pool to work with that the Swans ever did. So there's a lot more younger players out in the West playing AFL because they're not built as a rugby player.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a tall, skinny kid that can run, you're not going to play rugby.
No, you're going to get snapped in half.
You get snapped in half. Exactly. you run the other way.
Yeah, if your legs look like tree trunks, you're going to play rugby. If you're if you're 195 centimeters and 105 kilos, you're playing footy. You're a key forward. It's
totally.
Exactly.
So if you have a neck, you're playing footy. If you don't have a neck, you play rugby. That's what
that right there, I think that might be the little snippet of audio that I put in the thing that I post online right there. That's a great that's a great line right there. So
that's a very Aussie flippant line. Sorry.
I've never heard that one before. So
there you go.
I'm going to ask you, who is the second greatest player that you've ever seen play? Because I think I know who the first one would be, and he's still playing.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'm wrong on that one, but I think
the second greatest would have to be Tony Plugger Lockett.
Okay.
I was there when he kicked his 1300th at the G, which was brilliant. Look, Adam Goods.
Yeah.
He was a treat to watch when he played. Michael O'Loughlin, he was a cracking player. Of the current players, obviously, Isaac Heaney and Rampy and people like Luke Parker, they're brilliant as a Swans player. I mean, my dad always said James Hird was one of the best players he's ever seen play from Essendon. Mm-hmm. And I have seen Hirdy play, and he was very good. Like, he was brilliant. Over the years, gosh.
It's funny. It's funny. You haven't mentioned the one that I thought would have been the number one on your list.
Oh, Buddy.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned. That's why I mentioned second.
You said, well, I'm talking second.
Yeah, so that's why I thought Buddy was the first. Yeah.
So, Buddy was. Buddy's good.
Yeah.
Buddy's good.
So you are also the ninth female full member of the Melbourne Cricket Grounds. First of all, I have no idea what it means to be a member of the Melbourne Cricket Grounds. So I'd love to hear about that and the significance of there only, when you got this position, only being the ninth female to do that. Can you tell us about why that was and why that is so significant? Because
well, to start off, it's the Melbourne Cricket Club.
Cricket Club. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's the MCC, which is the trust of the MCG, which is the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Really, again, I would love to have a fantastic story behind this, but quite by default, back in the day, my father was a member of the Melbourne Cricket Club, as his father was, and to get in there, it was Grandpop got in and put my father's name down at birth. A bit like Lords in England, Marylebone Cricket Club in England. So one's name gets put down at birth, and then very much the son of the son of the son, the boys and the boys. And in 1984, when the AFL decided that maybe this game needs to grow and perhaps, who would know, play at night under lights. Mm-hmm. Here's a crazy thought. So the Melbourne Cricket Club, and there's a Melbourne Cricket Ground Trust. So the trustees of the ground and the Premier at the time, a man called John Cain, said to full voting members, and full voting members always had a ladies' ticket that came with the membership. So they said to the men, we want to build lights, because I think at some point in the next few years we're going to play a game at night. Mm-hmm. Crazy as it might seem, but we put big lights up, maybe people will come and watch it at night. So they said to the men, if you want to use your ladies' membership pass and convert that into a provisional membership for anybody in your family at a cost of, which I think was, it's about like I don't know, maybe $500 back then, 1984, I think it was, 83. We will do so. So I just started work, and Dad said to me, right, give us your best shot. And I said, I'll give you my money for the next 50 years. I'll iron all your shirts. I'll do everything I can. So we went halves, because a lot of money back then when I was still at uni and, working part-time. So we did. So I became a provisional member of the Melbourne Cricket Club. And I had great pride walking to my first MCG using my ticket to get in, and all the men were grumbling that women, it's outrageous, in the members' bar. And I was working for a newspaper at the time, cadet at the Australian Financial Review, and I took great pride in walking there one night. But then they realised that the lights that they had were pretty minimal, so they had to be built bigger ones. So a year or so later, they said to provisional members, if you wish to stump up a bit more cash, which was a lot more cash, you will become a full voting member. You will jump the queue of the men, of which, my brother was 35 at the time and still wasn't a member. So I jumped the queue and became a full voting member with a bit of cash. And so I walked into the long room, which is the hallowed turf of the long room, and ordered a gin and tonic, and I think it was like parting the Red Sea. And I'm only 5'2", and it was like grumble, 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 grumble of all men.
And did you kind of just point outside and say, see those lights?
Yeah.
I helped do that.
I helped do that, exactly.
So give me another gin and tonic.
Exactly.
So
that's it. So, but I'm very, very proud. It's a most wonderful thing, and I treasure it.
So how is lockdown going for you? Is it? Have you adjusted to it?
Well, I think we got through last year okay, because I think it was, this will all pass in a couple of weeks, and then it didn't, and it was really. I'm still busy at work, so it was just annoying working from home. It was like a very, very long weekend. I was like, working from home again today. But then, it got real, and we were in very lockdown, but we were okay in Sydney because we're still allowed out to walk around and do a bit of shopping, and, the great run of loo paper debate, which we lived through, which everyone's still baffled. I think the world is still scratching their head about that.
Well, I mentioned that to somebody that I think that whole debate was actually started by the people that run Coles and Aldi's and the other grocery stores in Australia and the ones here in the United States, because I think they started that whole panic because when you went there, and if you were going to try to just hoard paper, you went in and thought, well, you know what? I don't want to look like I'm doing just that, so I'll also go buy a bunch of other things at the grocery. So it was just a way for them to make more money, I think. That's my conspiracy theory. So,
I think people just panicked.
Yeah.
I think they saw the trolley in front of them had 60 rolls. So if they've got 60 rolls, I won't have any, so I better get 60 rolls. And off it went.
But they were packaging. Crazy. They were packaging them that way, though. It wasn't going and buying. There weren't just necessarily 4-packs. There were packs, as you said, with 20 rolls, 50 rolls, that sort of thing. So, you're buying one package. It just looks. The optics of it are.
I know. Well, I was last year at my local supermarket, and somebody did that, and somebody said, you don't need all that. And this lady got very upset, and they were trying to take it out of her trolley, and there were trolleys being bashed, and it was on for young and old. And I live in an area that was a bit of older demographic area, and so it was quite funny watching people. It's a bit housewives area, Beverly Hills housewives area, and it was quite funny watching them all getting their nails broken by scratching toilet paper at each other. But it felt very silly. But no, look, it's okay. It's. I think it's wearing thin. Are you okay? It's starting to wear thin. I think we're talking off air, but we're all getting frustrated here.
Right.
We survived. Australia survived the worst of it. We didn't have as many deaths, thankfully. We did the lockdown pretty quickly, but we're on our knees. The airline industry, Qantas is about to offload a lot more people, sadly. There are a lot of people hurting. Tourism here, our hotels are empty. Just people are out of work. We've had a lot of government assistance last year, but it's finished this time round. It's and unfortunately in Australia we're very disparate states, so we're probably different in a way to New York, in a way to America, where you don't have defined states. In a way, you don't shut borders to each other, whereas we do.
Yeah, I can't recall that ever actually happening. Yeah.
No, it's not like you're not allowed to fly from Boston to New York, as an example, where we can't. You get what I said before. Albury and Wodonga is the Sydney Victorian border, and it's literally a bridge over a river.
Okay.
And so there's police on either side of the bridge saying you can't go there. It's just crazy, and it's a very town where you go, but I work over the bridge there, and you can't go there. So it's crazy. Everyone's upset. People can't get to their jobs, and it's just killing domestic tourism in a country which has got no international tourism, because we are at the end of the earth. It is very difficult, and it's causing havoc for the AFL, of course.
Yeah, and well, that's kind of the subject of this podcast. That's that still is that is in many ways minuscule compared to all of the other issues.
Oh yeah. However, there's a lot of friends of mine at the Swans lost their jobs. There's a huge. The AFL is a massive employer. I mean, clubs, as I was saying before, footy clubs now are companies. They're big business, and it's not just on the field. There's a trainer per player. Buddy's probably got no end of people around him, not just physios and everything else, but marketing people and to look after him. Mental health experts. There's chefs. There's this. There's that. So they've all lost their jobs.
Right.
And this is 18 teams. I mean, that's multiplied. And then the AFL itself is a big business, and they've all been redundant. So the Swans are running on thin air at the moment. I mean, as John Longmire said, in Metricon last Saturday or last Sunday night, 3 players got kept in quarantine because they went to a game in Melbourne.
Yeah, they went to, what was it? France was there for a test match. Yeah.
Yes, the Wallabies versus France, and then Amy Stadium instantly overnight got turned into what they call a tier 1 in Melbourne. So there's a COVID case. So they had to isolate, and that was like 2 hours before the game started. So they had to rejig the whole team and bring in a few extra players from the reserves. And that's happening everywhere. That's just not the Swans. So it is. But I know a lot of people have lost their jobs at the footy club.
Yeah, and that's
it's bad, and they probably will not come back.
And that's unfortunate. That is definitely one of the big downsides of this. But
very much.
Have you seen any positives that have come out of the lockdown? Is anything that's been kind of like a glimmer of hope that's come out of it?
I think on the whole we're all sticking together. I think there's a lot of people are looking after each other. You get sort of random texts from friends saying you okay, you're hanging in there. I think sort of social media. I'm not big on the Twitter, Facebook kind of thing. I don't tweet a lot, but you get more messages from people saying what's happening and how you're doing, and we'll catch up when this happens, when this is over. I unfortunately in Australia, I don't know if it's a UK US word, but I fell over. We call it a stack. I stacked. I had a massive stack, and I broke my wrist. I fractured my wrist. I fell over in the street. We call it a stack.
Oh, like along the edge, the curb, along the edge of the.
Well, yes, I don't.
Okay.
Yes, pretty much. I was I was running down the street to the train and fell over something, either my feet or a bit of concrete or something. Anyway, I fell on my right wrist and fractured it, and had a plate put in. So I've got a bit of a Dame Rampy hand now.
Well, Michael Jackson is no longer using his gloves, so you're more than welcome to use it.
Thank you. Yes, it's all okay now. It's all good. But and again, sort of people rallied around, whereas normally you'd sort of go, oh, that's no good. You'd sort of get people actually making me bowls of lasagna and sticking it at my front door, and so I think we are all in this together, so I think the positive is it's showing us to be more empathetic with people, show a bit more empathy. If people are doing it tough, just don't dismiss it as a bit of a win.
That is a good thing. Hopefully that can carry on once this is all resolved as well. So hopefully that will continue.
That sometimes does.
Yeah, we shall see. So
I remember, I remember years ago when we had the Sydney Olympics, which was just the best ever experience. Even beats the Swans winning the grand final, and was such a fantastic 2 weeks. And the day after the flame went out and it all finished, we all been feeling a bit flat, and they had a sort of a ticker tape parade down the street for all. Australia invented the volunteers. The Sydney Olympics was when the big volunteer movement started, of people saying, get the bus here and get the train there and fix your ticket up. And we invented this new volunteer movement that Juan Antonio Samaranch said was the best Olympics ever. And we all went up to the street. George Street's the main street in Sydney, to watch the ticker tape parade to thank the volunteers. People were hustling and bustling and shoving each other out of the way. And I turned around to someone and said, well, that spirit's gone pretty quick.
It's
so I'm sure once the lockdown ends,
well,
the spirit may go a little bit. But I hope not.
We have an organization at the school where I teach, where it's like this kindness organization, and we've got dozens of kids every day that show up at school wearing shirts that say "Choose Kind" on them. So maybe they need to start printing those up there and just kind of leaving them at locations for people to pick up and wear for when this is all done.
Yes. I think it's the Aussie spirit. We kind of do it. We are a country that rallies. I think when you see pictures of bushfires and floods, and we do have extreme weather here, and we really are a country that just stops dead in the street. I fell over in the street and I had 4 people help me. I'm sure that would happen in the world, but you don't know. I lived in London, and I'm not sure if people might just push you out of the way. I don't know.
Well, in New York, that might happen.
Probably would.
Yeah,
people are busy.
Yeah.
But we are we're a smaller country, so we are very much a country that looks after each other, which makes me very proud.
That's not a bad thing at all.
Thing, but we also do take the mickey out of each other.
That's not so bad either. It's kind of like it's kind of like when you have siblings that you are allowed to give your siblings a hard time, but as soon as somebody that's outside of that sibling group starts to give one of your siblings a hard time, you all rally together.
Totally. Exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. So you are the commercial business editor for probably one of the biggest newspapers in the entire country, the Sydney Morning Herald. You don't start out as an editor. That's something you work towards doing. So can you tell us a little bit about your time as a reporter and how you worked your way up to becoming an editor?
Yes. Oh, thank you. I'm the commercial property editor.
I
started. That's okay. No, my very first job was down at the Stock Exchange in Melbourne, and the trading floor. We had all the chalkies running up and down on the chalkboards, And I loved it so much, and I ended up getting a job at the Financial Review in Melbourne and wrote about the share market reports and things, and ended up in Sydney working for the Australian newspaper, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, which is our national newspaper here. And I ended up being the business correspondent for the Australian in London for a couple of years, where I went to, it was quite interesting going to press conferences. I had name tag, would say Carolyn Cummins, the Australian. And people thought that I was it. Sorry,
you were the token Australian.
I was the Australian. And this is like mid-90s when Rupert Murdoch, who owned the Australian, wasn't that popular. So and people go, well, who's the Australian? What are you it? And I said, no, it's a Murdoch paper. And they'd run off then. And I'd have to yell to them saying, it's like the Times, it's like the New York, it's like the Times. So it was but I had the great fortune of going to the World Economic Forum in Davos, reporting on that. And I had the very, very great fortune, amongst other people, of being in a news conference at 2 a.m. with Nelson Mandela.
Oh, very cool.
And he gave the address with F.W. de Klerk. It was a 1992 in Davos was a reconciliation. So all the 13 USSR people were there, Yeltsin and Gorbachev, and it's very posh. Davos is very, Davos is a very posh ski resort in Switzerland, and it's the World Economic Forum's there. And so we, at the end of his very, very long session, which sort of finished the whole thing, in the media area, they said, Mr. Mandela will have a press conference now if you wish to interview him. So we all went into this room, and there was me and about 4 others. It was very, very late. A lot of people had to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was living at a very cheapy pension up the back end of Davos, which would have taken me 7 hours to walk through knee-deep snow to get to. And the Fraulein shut the door at about 10 anyway. And I was with a colleague from Australia from the Financial Review, and so I bunked in his room. Anyway, we're sitting there going, oh, my God, it's Nelson Mandela. What do we say? And there's probably about 10 of us in the room, and my colleague and I looked at each other and we put our hands up and said, do you think South Africa should be allowed back in the World Cup cricket? And he said no. So we got a world scoop. That was pretty exciting.
Wow, that's
that was pretty exciting. So yeah. So I tried to find the copy, but my newspaper, I had it in London and it didn't come back to Australia with me in the box. But it happened. We asked the question and he answered it, and he said, until I'm allowed to vote, until black people are allowed to vote, South Africa cricket should not, the embargo should be there. Apartheid, they should stop it. So that was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Cool.
And it's, very much so. And I didn't think we were going to be traveling down that avenue, but the fact that you got to, that is wonderful. That's
pretty proud moment.
I was going to say that kind of gets into the, I was going to say, what's the most important story you've ever covered? And I don't know if that qualifies as that, but that's,
yes, well, it was one of the big ones. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so I came back from London and got offered a job at the Sydney Morning Herald, and I've been there 26 years in June. So I'm giving my age away here, but so, and I started off, I'm a business journalist, and pretty much the mid sort of 90s, a lot of the, or late 90s, a lot of what they used to call listed property trusts and companies were starting to sort of merge and buy assets. Mm-hmm. A lot of like supermarkets, a lot of sort of a lot of companies own their own big buildings, and supermarkets own the supermarkets, and banks own their own property. And when the sort of late 90s, when expansion was looking to happen and business was starting to boom post, the early 90s recessions, etc., things were on the up. The companies needed money to do this, and they couldn't just keep going to their shareholders at the stock exchange and doing share issues, because that dilutes the share register.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the finance directors who looked after the property would all of a sudden went up to the CEO and said, you're sitting on $5 million of property here. We don't have to own this building. Because all companies back in the day had their own building with their own signs on the top, and there was a status symbol. And they said we could sell it to a trust and we just lease it back. And it's a whole lot cheaper. And all of a sudden this cash is let off the balance sheet for us to use. So listed property trusts all created that way. REITs, they're now called. That was a creation of a REIT. And so the REIT owns the property. The company leases it back from the REIT. So it takes all that cash off the balance sheet, which is sort of idle cash, really. That's sort of like equity in your own home.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tap into that equity of your own home, you may as well. And so I sort of cottoned onto this one day and said to my boss, this is quite a big story. And he said, well, you should write about it. And you should keep writing about it. And we'll call you the commercial property editor.
There you go.
I went, okay.
There you go. So you got a
so
whole.
I kind of fell into that one too.
And that's been going on for quite some time. And it's
Quite some time. That's how I met Andrew Pridham, who is the number one advisor for Frank Lowy in commercial property in the country.
That it's amazing the avenues that that one thing leads to another, and how that, because that comes back around to the whole being one of the ambassadors there as well. So if you were, and I'm asking this question not for myself because I'm not changing careers, but I know there are a few people who are going to be listening here to this one in particular. But if what advice would you have for somebody who is a journalism student in the 21st century?
I think it is a fantastic job. I mean, clearly newspapers are disappearing, sadly. So the print version of the job, I think, will go. I mean, I hate to say it, but probably the next 10 years, possibly, maybe 50. There is a place for newspapers, but I think it is a fantastic job. There is always the need to investigate and to get the stories out there, to keep people honest. And the favourite part of the job for me is you get to meet so many different people, and no day's the same. There's not that Groundhog Day. You don't earn the big cash, so don't go into journalism for the money, unless you go into TV perhaps. But it is a vocation. It's not a job. You have to be dedicated to it. You're always on call. You're always on the lookout for a story. Randomly, you might go to the football and somebody says something, and I think, well, gee, that's a good story. I'll follow that up on Monday. But every day is different. It's not a job that you wake up and go, oh God, I've got to do those accounts again. Oh God, I've got to do that interminable meeting again. It's the phone. The minute the phone rings, it could change your life.
So is this where I remind myself that I've been a school teacher for 27 years?
No. No, but that's different every day too. I mean,
you know what? You're right. In a way,
your
it is.
job will be different every day.
There's a lot of the personalities and such. Absolutely, yes.
Totally. You might have one teenage dirtbag one day, and you might have 10 the next.
There you go.
But you don't. You might get a question, Mr. Wessels, and you go, "Well, I didn't hear that question. I've never heard that question before."
Mm-hmm.
Which might go off in a different tangent.
That's a great point.
But I think your and my job are vocation jobs. They're not the big paying corporate world of lawyers and merchant bankers and that sort of things. and that's a whole different world that I couldn't do. I find it's just very, cold. It's a very cold world. But
Yeah, it's
I look as a journalist, a student, hang in there. It's online. It'll clearly online for the next. Newspapers will exist, but it doesn't matter. It's the same principle. Newspaper, print or online. It's the same principle of how you write the story, how you get the story, and just being interested in people and interested in we're not all going to be the investigative, Woodstein and Bernstein, Woodward and Bernstein. Not all of us are going to break Watergate.
right.
But I'm the only female commercial property owner in the country for many years. And it's fascinating. Every day is a fascinating day, particularly now with lockdown. What does it mean for the office landlords? I mean, do we go back to an office?
Yeah, that's a great point too, because you could, businesses may be seeing that they can survive with their workforce working from home.
Yeah,
and that may lead to a whole different avenue of what's going on with commercial property, and people may be left holding lots of empty buildings possibly.
Look, Sydney is not the most bustling of CBDs on the planet, but it's for our little part of the world it's pretty big. It's empty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now it's empty.
Right.
But I suspect even before we went into this lockdown, 4 weeks ago, my office, I'd say we're 60% full. I think everyone's pretty much embraced. I think we work 3 days at the office, 2 days at home. Some less, some more. So I think that's that's a new evolution of how do you make an office efficient in this sort of climate. I mean, do we go back? Whenever we go back, we've got a lot of empty space around me, but people, I work with people, and there's a guy that I wore a mask every day even before this all happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to say, and he was quite upset by it. If none of us sanitized our hands, and he would wash his keyboard down every day, and he was the only one that used it, but he was really quite concerned about it, which people are.
Mm-hmm.
Others a bit more flippant, like me, perhaps. But but again, I'm not going to wear a mask to work, but he did. So you forget that people don't want to go back to an office. They are really quite concerned about things, and that then flows into all the cafes in office towers, all the coffee shops and the cafes and the sandwich shops, and all those little nook and cranny shops in a city CBD, all empty and may never come back.
Right.
So
This has been a huge shift, all over the world. This is it's not something that's isolated to the U.S. or to Australia. This is happening. No. This is happening everywhere. And
I think a year ago, the Ruby Princess turned up on our doorstep in Australia, the cruise ship.
Mm-hmm.
When it kind of all started, but we all thought it was a bit of a flu thing. This flu thing, it'll come and go. You just get a bit sick, you'll be fine. Nobody in their wildest dreams would have thought it would come to this. And a year later, I think we haven't gone down the herd mentality that perhaps the UK has, or even perhaps parts of the US, parts of the world. Australia and New Zealand are quite the isolated down unders. And being a smaller population, deaths are bigger here. It's, we don't have the bazillion population of overseas, obviously, even though the Australian continent is pretty much the same size as the North American continent.
Right.
That was, as an aside, that was one of the funniest things. When we had the Sydney Olympics, we had some overseas press in our building, and they were writing stories about, well, you could go to Ayers Rock for lunch, then you could pop down to the Barossa Valley for afternoon tea, and then pop over to Sydney for the opening ceremony. And we said to them, there was a guy in our in the office. We went over and we said, "Can we just show you a map of what you're actually saying?"
Yeah, you need a fighter jet to be able to do that, to cover that distance.
I said, "Do you own a Concorde?" But they had, like, people still have no concept of what it's like to travel in this country.
Mhm.
I mean, 90% of it's uninhabitable. There's a huge, great desert in the middle of it all. So it's, even though we're the same size, we're just a smaller population because we all hug the coast, obviously.
Right.
So look, it's tough. I think it's very tough, and I think it'll take a long, long time for this one to recover, because I think we we look at different. Sydney tends to look at the people that are infectious in the community, which right now is 50 people, which doesn't sound much, but it's, people keep going visiting each other and giving it to each other, and that's the hard part to get through to people. So for commercial property, all the shopping centres are dead, all the big shopping malls. Westfield is a big shopping mall over here, which is big in America. The big W, the big red W, empty. I mean, those tenants won't survive at all. I mean, department stores, will department stores survive anymore? Does people want to go? Do you want to walk through Saks Fifth Avenue with a whole bunch of other people?
Well, and as you said, this is kind of an extension, because this then will trickle down from, yes, the headquarters building may be empty, then the shops may be empty, and then the employees don't have positions to work in anymore. So this whole thing has been, while the health issue has been catastrophic, certainly, I think you could argue from an economic standpoint, it's been even more catastrophic, because it's going to lead to the upheaval of so many, people's lives and their very existences.
Oh, very much. I mean, I did an economics degree, and at the end of 4 years, the lecturer came out and said, well, the only thing you really have to worry about is employment. If people are gainfully employed, they will spend money, and that will keep the economy ticking over. If you're unemployed, first thing you do is stop spending money. Like, if you lose your job tomorrow, go, we're not going out for coffee. We're buying the milk. We're putting the pot, we're espresso.
Right.
Nescafe, get the jar out. All those things that will trickle down. We're not going on that trip to see grandma. We're going to ring her. So you don't need petrol. So you don't need 2 cars. It all just comes to a grinding halt. And I think, and again, that's sort of, for my job, that's what we write about every day, which is all big doom and gloom. But at the same token, the fun part to write about is how warehouses are going gangbusters. The old humble shed has taken on a life of its own, because everyone has to store stuff. Everything you buy overseas, everything you buy on the internet. So that's a very Australian expression. Everything we buy overseas, because we do, because we don't manufacture much here anymore.
We don't do as much as we used to here. So I can completely empathize with you there. Yes.
So everything goes into a warehouse that one purchases online. Like those Amazon fulfillment centers, they're like mega cities.
Yeah.
They're massive things.
Yeah, I've got a couple things that are supposed to be coming today. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Bezos said, I thank you every Amazon person. Send him into space.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not sure that went down well.
So I wanted to.
So anyway, that's
okay. I kind of wanted to wrap this up with a couple questions that are not necessarily related to footy or to anything, but just some kind of like personal things, advice or that sort of thing. So yeah, these are some of the questions that I asked to a lot of the guests that I have on. So do you consider yourself a bit of a movie buff at all?
Oh yeah, quite
Okay.
like movies. Yep,
So
yep,
so
yep.
what are like 2 or 3 movies that you think everybody should see?
The Right Stuff.
Sticking with the
Love.
Jeff Bezos theme.
Yep, yep. I love The Right Stuff. I think it's a movie of just. I love Dominic Dunn, but it's just I love space. I think it's a concept of going out to the final frontier, I guess,
Mhm.
apart from like the Star Wars. I just resonated with the movie. I just loved when I went to Washington, the Smithsonian. I just spent hours just looking at the Smithsonian. I loved it. But just the concept of going to space, I think it was fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think The Right Stuff was just and the story of Chuck Yeager, which maybe it's a bit of an Aussie thing of the underdog, but he was one of those, the unsung hero of it all. And John Glenn, and I think too it resonates in that they flew over here a couple of times,
Hmm.
and
So,
the
if I
Aborigines.
can chime in here real quick, John Glenn was a United States senator from the state of
He
Ohio
was.
for many years as well. Then, yep.
Exactly. Yes, I was in New York when he took off on his last flight. He went up to space
Hmm.
in the shuttle. Yeah.
Cool.
I got the fly. I was in coming back from a conference, and I was at LA Airport watching it on the telly.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, but no, I love that movie. I just thought the whole thing, and they flew over, and his heat shield came off, and he
Hmm.
flew over Australia, and they did the big corroboree, which is apparently quite true, and that's why Perth's called the City of Lights, because all the lights came on to wish him well
Oh, very cool.
across
I
as he
didn't know
came.
that.
Yeah, so and of course we also have the moon landing, which Parkes, the Parkes
Hmm.
telescope. It's a wonderful movie called The Dish. If you haven't seen it,
Oh,
that's a
I have not.
fantastic movie. You've got to watch that. The best movie, The Dish,
Okay. Cool.
and that's about how the Parkes telescope took from the moon landing
Terrific.
and
Okay.
televised it to the rest of the world.
See, that's one that I've not heard of before. So that's a
Oh, that's a must watch. The
okay.
Dish, and that's a true story because there was wind.
Well, unless it's not a true story,
Yeah,
it's not a true
we
story unless
televised.
you go ahead.
Sorry,
I was gonna say it's
I was
not a
gonna
true
say-
story if you think there's the moon landing was faked, which I don't. But
No. Get your tin hat on, Greg. Where's the tin hat? Hang on. It's not fake. That's not a MAGA cap, by the way.
yeah,
It's not a Trump cap. No. Capricorn 1, actually, if you watch Capricorn 1 with OJ Simpson.
I haven't seen a whole lot with O.J. Simpson lately.
Oh,
Yes.
no, I think that's his one and only minute. That will freak out the conspiracy theorists because it proves it. Well, it was a movie about them not landing on the moon.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And so, yeah, so Capricorn 1, not my favourite. So I would say The Dish, obviously The Right Stuff,
Okay.
The Dish, and oh gosh, there's too many great movies. I don't know. There's another one.
Well,
in
you mentioned
Australia.
you mentioned Capricorn 1. We can certainly that could be
Capricorn
our
1,
third.
but I don't want to be associated by believing it. It's rubbish.
That's okay. That's okay.
It's a rubbish movie. Well, it's a conspiracy theory movie.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful Australian movie called The Castle, which is a great movie. The Castle.
All right.
Anyway.
Okay,
All
so
the old ones, Gone with the Wind, of course. I guess if I was on a deserted island, I'd like a long one, like Gone with the Wind, because you can go off and get a coconut and come back.
there you go.
And Atlanta's still burning.
Okay, so let's say that Sydney's going to be opening up here very soon, and knock on wood, and they announced to you that they're going to be that they're going to put you in charge of the first music festival in Sydney. So what three bands or artists are going to be playing at your music festival?
Oh, I'm not a very musical person. What three? Oh, should have my friend Jane here. I'm not a very musically person. I like bands. I only know the old ones.
Mhm.
So for me, I would say Crowded House, even though they're Kiwis.
Okay.
It's a bit Pavlova, Russell Crowe. When they're good, we take them as Aussies. When they're bad, they're Kiwis.
Okay.
But even though Crowded House is a good Kiwi band, well, you can't go past John Farnham and The Voice. It's the anthem in Australia. Again, you've got to Google this. John Farnham.
John Farnham.
Voice.
Okay.
Farnham. It's a bit of one of those American Pie at the end of the night when you're leaving the pub.
Okay. Okay.
Oh goodness me. Well, I don't know, something like the theme song of the University of Cheer Cheer the Red and White.
There you go. Well, that works.
Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame's theme song.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that works.
Goes na na. So sorry, I'm not very good on music. I don't listen to it a lot.
That's okay. Sorry. That's okay. We've got two more questions for you here before we wrap up.
Sure. Yeah.
And I might ask you one third one just as we're closing up though here. If you were in a room with all of the people that you have ever met and all the people you've ever known, and you walk into that room, who are you going to look for first?
I would like to look to my my grandfather.
Okay.
And ask him what he thinks about the modern game of footy.
That's a great answer.
I think, again, meet your idol, and it's always disappointing. I think, so Grandpop, I would seek him out.
Okay.
And because I was only 10 when he passed away, so and he was always seemed grumpy to me, but
But you were fortunate enough to live in the same community with him, right? So that was so that is a huge bonus. That's one thing that my sister and I, we had the benefit of that. I mean, in fact, the street that I live on is one street over from where my grandparents lived. They lived one block over from where I lived. So,
wonderful.
Both sets were here, and
fantastic.
The last question I have for you here: when you sit down as a journalist and you sit down at your keyboard and you write your autobiography, what's it gonna be called?
Oh, I'm on to that.
Okay,
that's what I say to every barking mad stupid idea an editor says to me. Hey, CC, why don't you go and do that? And I go, hey, that's a great idea. I'm on to that.
So have you been...
I completely forget it 10 seconds later.
Have you compiled a list of those things? Because it might make a good book.
Yeah. Well, probably, one day. They say there's a book in all of us.
Yes, there you go. Okay. Well, last thing I'm going to ask you here, and then we'll close this out. Does Buddy get 1,000 goals this year?
I'm crossing. You can't see me. I'm crossing. Yes. No.
5 games, 19 goals.
Look, it's doable.
Well, okay. You know what? 5 games and finals. Still have finals yet.
Okay. Hopefully. If we get the finals, it's doable. It is definitely doable. However, I was at the 2014 granny. Buddy hit the 2012, beg your pardon. 2012 granny. I was sitting there in the boondocks of the MCG members because I got a allocated seat in the ballot. I was literally 4 rows from the back of the MCG members stand, which is like really insect-looking, high-power binocular.
But remember, it's a better game to watch live.
It was. It was still good. It was still good, and I was sitting surrounded by very Melbourne people who were looking down on me because we were playing Hawthorn, of course. And I was festooned in red and white. And this bloke kept looking at me because we, as members of the MCG, you get quite a nice little badge. And he kept looking at my badge as if I'd stolen it from my father. You know, like he was, how dare this woman's a member? And Buddy hit the behind post and went slumped. And this guy turned around to me and said, "You've won this." I said, "I know." And then when we won it, he said, "He's all yours." Because he joined the Swans that next year.
Right. Now, was that something that was already in the works? Did you kind of know that was going to be happening at that point in time?
No, nobody knew. Andrew Pridham is the most poker-faced man on the planet. Nobody knew. There were rumours, but nobody knew. I think Buddy was trying to get out of Melbourne because Melbourne's a fishbowl for their players. And Sydney, the thing again with Sydney is apart from the weather and every other bit of competition you have for going to an AFL game, if it's a blisteringly gorgeous day, I say to friends, "Go watch the footy," and they go, "What are you, mad? We're going to the beach. We're going to the pub. What do I want to watch AFL for, you stupid?" And so to get people in there, and no one cared about it, but Buddy to come out of, so Buddy could walk around Sydney pretty much unknown-ish. I've seen him in my local street here, and he's married to a very gorgeous girl, Jacinta, and I did see them one day walking down my little main street here, and I actually was walking up thinking, God, those people are tall. God, they're tall. And then they had their really fluffy, silly dog, like a really stupid dog. Like, you know, as we call it here, Paris Hilton dog.
Yeah.
It was really stupid. And I was looking, and my eyesight's not the best. And I was a little closer, and I thought, why would you have such a stupid dog? And then I looked at Jacinta, and I thought, God, mate, God, Jesus. And as I got closer and closer, I'm sort of going, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God. And it was only me.
Yeah.
Literally, it was a Sunday afternoon where I live. It's quiet, and I kind of walked past coolly, looking wobbly knees, and I thought, "Where's my phone when I need it?"
Yeah,
but then it'd be too paparazzi.
Right. But that's
and so I kind of thought, "Oh, that's Buddy Franklin and Jacinta and a really stupid dog." And so I actually texted Andrew Pridham and I said, "I've just seen Buddy. Are the rumours true?" And Andrew is a merchant banker and I've known him for years. And Andrew said, as if I'm going to comment on that text. And he came back going, as if I'm going to comment.
Yeah.
I said, "You know me better," as if I'm going to comment.
Oh, so this was after the grand final and before he had joined Sydney. He was visiting Sydney. Wow. So you in a way you kind of had a little bit of a scoop, but you didn't have a confirmation of it.
No, exactly.
Wow.
So this could have been a bit earlier, I think, actually. Because I remember at the time thinking, oh, that's weird. Because he did meet Jacinta at the Melbourne Cup and it was all over the papers. More in Melbourne than Sydney again. But unfortunately, when he came to Sydney, there were issues and he rolled his car and took out 5 other cars at the same time and wasn't his best entry into Sydney. And there were sort of suggestions surrounding it all, but we won't go into that. And then he, had his mental health issue, which he did have mental health issues. But he's back on the right track and it's brilliant. And I think the good thing about the Swans predominantly the team, Buddy, because he's 6 foot bazillion tall.
Yeah.
I've actually met him. I'm 5'2", and I come up to just under his elbow. I have a photo of me and Buddy, and he's literally his arms around me, and he's with his elbow. And Isaac Heaney, because he's on the posters.
Right.
But I would say 90% of the Swannies could walk down the street and I would know who they are.
And that's kind of a good thing.
Which they love.
Yeah.
Whereas Melbourne, Perth, and Adelaide, it's just AFL focused, and they can't do anything. That was the downfall of poor old Ben Cousins, amongst other things.
Yeah.
But Ben was so big in Perth that he couldn't do anything without 50 people surrounding him at any given point and egging him on. Oh, come on, Ben, kick a footy to me, mate. I'm having a coffee. Oh, you're an idiot. We hate you, Ben. And Barry Hall was the same up here in Sydney. Big Bad Barry, who's another great player.
Well, it's interesting because some of the people that I talk to that are Geelong supporters say that in many ways the Geelong is a really good situation for players because it's out of that fishbowl, and that while the Cats supporters are the Cats players are there. Yeah, well, the Cats players are there. People see them, but they kind of just let them be. They don't, it's not. They're not necessarily, in their face or that sort of thing because they're so intertwined with the community already. So
well, that's now. I think when, yes, I think that's the issue. All of those big players, Geelong, Gary Ablett Senior had this issue. He could not go anywhere without being a mini celebrity in his heyday, and really was really when the sort of they monetised and corporatised footy that people like Gary Ablett Jr. could be a bit more protected because they sort of had people to go and get them coffee, and they were in a bubble a little bit more because they couldn't be normal people, because people in a small community like Geelong, they go to the local supermarket and they would get harangued by somebody going, mate, 3/4 time, you kicked it to the wrong person. What were you thinking?
Yeah.
And who wants to go to the local supermarket and get your worst issues played back at you?
Right.
And this is the thing with sports people. I think that's why they do have mental health issues, is that they go to the office every day and all their faults are there for millions to see. You go to work and you might get a name wrong. They go, oh, Mr. Wessels. And you go, oh, sorry, yes.
I do get names wrong, yes.
Yes, yeah. And you might talk, and you go, oh, Mr. Wessels, it's Washington. It's not Roosevelt. And you go, oh, yes, I meant Washington. But you've got 50 million people going, it's Washington, you idiot.
Yeah,
and that's hard for a 20-year-old to comprehend, really.
That's a really good point, and it is it's kind of a double-edged sword because the athletes in the AFL, that while they do earn a very decent living, they've not necessarily, most of them have not priced themselves out of interacting with the rest of society.
Yes,
exactly. It's like I've said that, I've said before, you're not going to run into LeBron James at 7-Eleven because he forgot to pick up a gallon of milk on the way home from the basketball game.
Totally, he's got people to do that.
Right, exactly. But you might run into, the guy who was the medical sub on your team might have to stop by and pick up a box of cornflakes, on his way home, so he's got breakfast tomorrow morning. You might see that person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing with again, and there's another aside to all this. Paul Roos, who was brilliant player, played for Fitzroy in Melbourne last couple of seasons.
I'm very well aware of him. He and I were born on the same day.
Oh, was he? Well, he's married to an American, and he brought football to UCLA where his wife worked, and sort of he kicked off a bit of the Aussie America AFL. He's got great books out, Roosie, on footy and everything. He's got a great autobiography on. Again, Google books like that, but Roosie's got some good books out as well. But he was a great player and became the coach of the Swans, and really took it to another level, because he could see when he took over that the money was rolling in, that it wasn't just a game you played on the weekend. It was a career. And he saw all these younger players that had nothing more, that they could play footy. I mean, bear in mind, the world over, and tell me when I'm talking too much, but
no, you're fine.
The world over is, if you're a great sports person, you're pinged at 10, pretty much in any field of sport. You're noticed at about 10 or 11. Like if you're a great high jumper or a great gymnastic or a great NFL player or something, people will pick you up at the local sports at school. You know, you might have in your school, you know, your sports captain.
You're right.
You know, we'll sit around in the teacher's room going, you know, this kid, he could play for the Cincinnati Reds, or you know, and they're nurtured. And then the talent scout gets to them. What's that movie? The Sandra Bullock one? You know, the
The Blind Side.
The Blind Side, you know. There's talent scouts the world over. AFL, cricket, the Waugh brothers who played for cricket, Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh, played for in Bankstown in Sydney, out in the west. They were 10. They're twins. They were 10, and the sports captain of their club rang up Cricket Australia and said, "I've got these twins. They can play. These kids can play." So they went out there, watched them play, and this talent scout from the Australian Cricket Association went over to Mr. and Mrs. Waugh and said, you know, Steve's going to captain Australia and Mark was going to open for Australia. They were 10. That was their talent, the sheer talent of them. For the Swans, Callum Mills played for the Mossman Swans where I live, in Mossman here. I saw him play when he was 10. And my nephew, well, my godson was playing. They're all like under 10s, flipping around and falling over like a soccer game kind of thing. Normal Sunday, real freezing cold, midwinter. And I was with my cousin. We were going, "Oh, God, you Harry. Yes, you got the ball." We had the ball, Harry. "Oh, you're playing well, Harry." And this kid, he was marking it. He was handballing it. He was playing Callum Mills. Not Callum. There's an ad in Australia called Calamari, but Callum Mills. And he's now Callum Mills. Number 14, you know, he's got number 14 on his back, which is a big number. So these kids are told at 10 that they're brilliant and they're nurtured and they're everything else. So they hit the big time, but they're numb knuckles because they don't have to go to school. They really don't have to learn anything because they know the cash is going to flow into them. You give them homework, they go, "Oh, yeah, thanks, Mr. Wessels, you know, but I've got to practice sport." And so you help them through to get them through school. But Paul Roos got there and he said to them all, "Okay, you can all play footy, you're all good, but what do you do if you do your knee at 20 and you're gone? You all have to have a career."
Smart man.
Very smart. So he forced all of the Swans players all go to some form of school, either, you know, TAFE or like they do an apprenticeship, perhaps as a plumber, I think Rampy's done an MBA. Kieran Jack's he's done a doctorate. He's done an MBA, Kieran Jack.
Wow.
They all have careers
Mm-hmm.
tandem to their footy. So if something terribly wrong happens, that, AFL is a very unforgiving sport on knees.
Right.
And shoulders and things. So Paul Roos said it's not all about footy. So he was kind of the first to say you've got to get your mental health right. You can't train 24/7. Because, I met Paul Kelly, who's a brilliant player back in the day for the Swans. He's a fantastic player. Again, I watch him every day. He's a lovely bloke, but he was so taut because all he did was train. So he's constantly doing his hamstring, and he bent down to pick the ball up. He'd twang a hamstring because he was too taut. And there's life after footy. AFL has a lifespan of you pretty much you're 35. That's a good innings.
Yeah,
it's a good career.
Yeah.
So,
they're David Mundy. They're planning services for somebody like Mr. Mundy out there with with Fremantle, who's 35 or
who's it's a very hard game. It's running half a marathon every game.
Right. Well, people are trying to knock you on your butt.
Yeah, exactly. It is the only game in the world where you can crawl up somebody's back and make a mark and get a point, but you cannot push them in the back to get them out of the way. That's a penalty.
Yes. You mentioned, and we'll wrap up after this because it's after 11 there your time.
I'm fine.
You mentioned the 10-year-olds and identifying that, and I'm just, as you're talking about that, I'm sitting here thinking about when my son was that age. He was, a friend of mine and I, and actually there were three of us that were coaching. We had a travel baseball team that went and played at high-end tournaments around the area. We were not a great team. We were a pretty good team, but we were not a great team. But I'm just running through that list of kids that are on that team, and I think we had 14 players, and 4 of them went on to play baseball in college,
which is fantastic.
And one of them is playing professionally.
Wow!
So it's
I think you're born with it. If you're born with that talent, you're born with it.
Yeah.
Like tennis players, whatever. You're luckily good on them, half their luck. But I think that's the thing. AFL now, there are so many good players, but you've got to nurture them. But you've also got to nurture their mental health and life after the game. They all can't be commentators.
That's a great point, because I was wondering, when Clarko steps down, what is he going to do? Because all the interviews I've watched, he's not exactly the most outgoing interviewee. So I don't think he's going to be somebody that's going to be doing color commentary during a game.
No, exactly. And I think that's that's what you've got to. The tragedy of AFL too, they spit a lot of people out. But I think as a young player, like as you say, young journo, you sort of got to look to the future as well. And I think that, so Paul Roos really did kick that off for a lot of the players. So I can only hope that, I don't know where people like Clark, Bomber Thompson went a bit pear-shaped as well. Your coach, he was a brilliant coach, but I think that's a problem. They, they don't know what to do with themselves afterwards. So, but the good thing is that's what the Swans do. They keep a low profile, and they all sort of have other things to do out off the field as much as on the field. And that's another thing about AFL is it's such a good game because there's so much on the field that you don't have much like off the field, like the soccer hooligans of the UK.
Right.
Soccer, there's nothing happening on the field because they're boring.
I am not a big soccer fan, so you're
Oh,
you're
okay.
certainly not offending me at all.
Oh, good. It
Yes.
just goes on. And so you get bored in the stand, so you get drunk, and it just all escalates. Whereas AFL, a live game, you'd say, "Oh, CC, it's your shout," and I go, "Oh, Craig, hang on,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
5 minutes, you know, because
I've never had anybody mention soccer that way before. And people who listen to the show are going to hear this again because I joke about soccer being a communist sport because they don't let you use all of your body parts.
Yes,
Yeah. so,
it's so true.
yeah,
Hands off.
exactly. So
Uh,
we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Ladies and gents, I would absolutely love to thank my guest, Carolyn Cummins, for coming on today for this talk. We went down a lot of, I think very interesting avenues. This has been a whole lot of fun. I loved your insight about the game. I truly appreciate your insight about your career in journalism.
Thank you.
I'm not a journalist. I do a little podcast that gets 100 or 150 people listening to each episode. So it's getting there, but it's not quite where I'd like it to be. But I truly thank you for taking time out of your evening here to sit down and chat with me about some footy and about the Swans. And
it's been an absolute pleasure, Craig. No, it's been a highlight, I have to say. It's been wonderful. I've been following you on Twitter and your compatriots in America, and it's just so lovely to get our wonderful little game out to the rest of the world.
And we're doing our best to try to do that. As I tell folks, I said this is I use this podcast as kind of like a bell tower to kind of ring it and say, hey, people, you should come check out this game. If you're not doing it. So
fantastic.
This was truly appreciated. I thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
All right. A big thanks to Carolyn Cummins for coming on the podcast. It was great to talk to her. She's somebody that I do trade notes with on Twitter quite frequently. She's been very receptive to a relatively new footy fan wanting to talk about the game and ask questions. And it was absolutely fabulous to talk to her. A lot of fun. And it was great learning about how things related to becoming a member of the MCC actually work. That was extraordinarily interesting. Now, don't forget, folks, that you can find, as I'd mentioned before, everything related to the podcast at my website at yankonthefooty.com. I hope you'll consider checking it out. Remember, you can leave a voicemail there. You can share your views on an issue. You can get signed up on the mailing list, as well as getting on the guest intake if you want to become a guest. If you want to help out the show, you can go to the Buy Me a Coffee page, as I'd mentioned as well. Remember that all of the episodes are located there. You can find them also, most of them on my YouTube channel. I've started to update that a little bit as well. Just look for my name, Craig Wessels. And now that you've listened, I hope you'll consider leaving me a 5-star review on your favorite podcast hosting site. Don't forget that you can, of course, reach me at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. If you need to shoot me an email. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter at yank_on, or on Facebook and Instagram at @yankonthefooty. And like I said, you can also get signed up for the mailing list there, so when a new episode comes out, you get it before anybody else. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for listening, because while we're fans of our clubs, we're through the first round of finals, I'm a little despondent about what happened. Great game by Port Adelaide. Melbourne, you played a fantastic game as well. GWS and Sydney, that might have been the game of the year. Swans, you put up one hell of a fight at the end there, and it just so many opportunities that just kind of frittered away from you. You can't hang your head because you did everything you possibly could to win that game, and it was a very impressive effort on your part. And Bulldogs, you played well again, and it's great to see the Bulldogs moving on. I hope you'll consider sharing this podcast with your friends and family. Just drop the link in an email or post it on your social media, that would be absolutely fantastic. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. This has been episode 102 of A Yank on the Footy. Don't forget that you can reach me at yank_on or at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at A Yank on the Footy or on my website at yankonthefooty.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll share the podcast with your friends and family. And until next time, goodbye.